So in today's episode, we'll be back out at Buttonwillow's 13 clockwise configuration for the second time ever following our first track day just over a month ago. However, before we head out there for the weekend, I first need to address an issue that became quite problematic while we were out on track the last time. Now, in case you missed the last episode, which I'd urge you to go back and watch if you want to see the E36 M3's first ever track outing, but in that episode, I mentioned that at the end of the day, after several hot laps, my brakes began shaking pretty bad once they got hot, which meant that throughout the day, I ended up warping my front rotors pretty significantly. Now, I suspect that even though I had done quite a bit of work to prepare the E36's braking system, simply due to my lack of experience of actually being out on track, which of course led to the way I was driving the car that day, that I ended up severely overheating my front brake rotors, which combined with the fact that these rotors are drilled and slotted, which I learned isn't exactly the most ideal rotor for track purposes, is likely why they ended up warping. So just a heads up if you're watching this and are planning to do any sort of tracking with your car and are considering drilled and slotted rotors, this is your warning. So before I load the car back up and head out to Buttonwillow for the second time, I'm going to replace my warped front rotors, and in their place will go these Brembo blanks. I decided to go with these for a couple of reasons. First was because they're fairly cheap at $106 each or $212 for the set before taxes and shipping. And second was because they weren't drilled or slotted. Now, just informationally, for those of you who may not know, but while it might seem like drilled and slotted rotors would be ideal for track duty, it turns out that unless you're running carbon ceramic brakes, drilled and slotted rotors are almost never used for race cars at any level. The reason being is due to the fact that when rotors are drilled out after being made, they can cause micro stress fractures, which can lead to weak points in the rotors that, when constantly heat cycled during racing conditions, can lead to rotor failures. Which begs the question, what rotors should you use then? The best options are simply slotted rotors, and not to be confused with drilled and slotted rotors. This allows for gas dissipation during braking through the grooves cut into the rotors, but don't have the same micro stress fractures that come with drilled rotors. But the next best option are simply blank rotors, like these Brembo ones I'm installing here. These are best for heat absorption and are maximally durable since there are no drills or slots machined into them. And not only that, but they are also usually the cheapest option, which is why I went with them this time around. But with the rotor swap finished and a brief nut and bolt check done, the M3 was back on the ground and ready to head out to Buttonwillow Raceway. Now, similar to the last track day, there was a quick drive north to get to the hotel, of course a couple of stops for gas, but before we knew it, it was Saturday morning and we were officially at Buttonwillow Raceway and prepping for the day's event. Now, before anyone went out on track, the lower level driving groups were required to attend a driver's meeting to go over passing rules, flag meetings, and just an overall itinerary of the day so we all knew what to expect out of the day's event. And unlike the last event, where I had specifically signed up for the lowest level run group, today's event was a bit different as I had signed up for a level just above that, the low intermediate run group. But run groups aside, after watching a couple of buddies go out on track who are in the more advanced groups, it was finally time for me and the M3 to head out on track to start what is now my second day out on track ever. Now, my first session out was mostly to fill out the car and refamiliarize myself with driving the M3 on track again, as it's been just over a month since I've been out here and I didn't really get much of an opportunity during my first track day to drive the car 10/10ths the way I'd have liked to, as the majority of those sessions were coach led, and by the time we were allowed to fully push our cars, it was the end of the day and conditions weren't ideal. So due to my focus being on that, I didn't record any of the first session out. But with that means that today's event was truly the first time I'm getting to really push the car and see what it's capable of, given my skill level of course. And not only that, but I'm also getting a feel for the brakes to make sure that the pulsation feeling I had at the end of the last track day was gone, so I could start to feel confident in my braking capabilities as I start to push the car harder and harder throughout the day. So now headed into my second session, a buddy of mine who was also out here today and driving his car, which happens to be a very similarly built E36 M3, decided to tag along with me for my session to give me some pointers on what I could do to improve the way I'm driving around the track and to ultimately improve my time. So what you're seeing here is a few of the flyer laps of us coming down the front straight. case it isn't very clear on video, each lap I was getting quicker and quicker with the advice of my buddy, who compared to me at my current driving level, runs about 20 seconds faster around this track in his similarly built E36 M3 than I do. So even though these laps are objectively still slow compared to most of the other people out here driving today, compared to my very first time out, I'm already feeling much more confident in gaining lots of time with each flying lap. That is, of course, until our last lap of the session, where coming out of the last turn before heading up the front straight, which is famously known to be the most common turn where people end up off track, we did just that. Due to another issue my M3 is experiencing, I ended up coming into the turn a little too quick, and when I tried to continue slowing down, I ended up causing the rear end to kick out, which flipped the M3 180 degrees and caused us to face head-on with oncoming traffic. Thankfully though, we managed to avoid hitting the wall on the other side of the track, as well as being in a big enough gap between the other cars that we didn't end up seeing any cars come our way until we were able to get the car turned around and ultimately off track for what ended up being the end of that session for us. Now at this point in the day, I was heading into my third session, which also happens to be the only session I filmed from inside of the car, but it's also what became a new personal best after my first initial warm-up lap, so I'm going to let the lap run. But really quick, I do want to point out that the mic I had attached to the car didn't record like I had planned, so the audio in this clip is from the camera that's filming, which isn't great, but it's better than nothing, I think. So bear with me as I'm still figuring out how to film these laps the best, and I promise this setup will be better very soon, just not today unfortunately. But enough talking, here's this session's PB lap. Now I know it probably wasn't the most exciting lap you've ever seen, but for me, at this very moment, it was literally the fastest I've ever driven around this track. So for me, it was very exciting and encouraging to see the improvement, especially in such a short period of time. But after this session, and before my next, I ended up getting the chance to ride along with my buddy who rode along with me earlier in the day. This time, not so much to give me pointers on my driving, but to show me how they drive around the track, which ended up being extremely beneficial to see just how capable their E36 M3 was compared to mine, since again, they are both very similarly built. And just from that ride along and the 3 or 4 laps we did around the track, I was able to immediately go out and start shaving off time from the PB I had just set during my last session. With each lap, I was shaving nearly 1 second off for each hot lap I was doing, all the way until my 5th and final session for the day, where I managed, in total, to knock 4 more seconds off of the PB I set earlier in the day at 224.2, all the way down to a new personal best at 220.65, which in total is 10.81 seconds faster than my PB on my very first track day just 1 month prior to this, which, just to remind you, was a 231.47. Now, the rest of the day consisted of hanging with friends, walking around the pits to see everyone else's cars, and packing up to head out once the day's event was officially over. But once the last couple of sessions ran and everyone began to head back home, I found a quiet area to park the M3 and grab a few beauty shots before officially closing out my second event ever. All right, day one is officially done. Records have been broken, obviously, because I'm, coming to the track for the first time, all these times, these are my first times out rather. I'm gonna hit PBs a lot, but it feels good to have just been here a month ago and then to come today and, do 11 seconds better around the track. Plus, I got to ride with a friend and learned a lot. His car is about 15 or 20 seconds faster than even my car is around this track. And so I learned a lot of what I could start doing to this car next. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into it. But I just wanted to close this video out. It's an amazing sight. It's an amazing day. And I just couldn't be more stoked to be out here with the car that I've built for the last year and a half. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. I think tomorrow's track day will be another episode. So if you don't want to miss that, definitely consider subscribing. I look forward to catching you guys in the next episode. Thank you for watching.